Welcome, everyone. We're just going to let everyone join the Zoom here. And as people come into the room, just a reminder, we'll get started in a couple of minutes here. We're very excited to be welcoming two special guests with us to talk about AI data centers. And we'll get started right away. Just a reminder, if you have any questions already, you can type them into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. This session is being recorded as well, so we will make sure that you're able to access that in your inbox. If you want to share it with friends and family or anyone who's interested who couldn't be here tonight, you can do that as well. And we'll get started really soon. Thanks.
Brad, is the chat open for people to introduce themselves a little for us?
That is a good question. If folks want to try the chat, I think it might just be hosts and panelists, but we could open it up a little bit. Potentially, we'll try to do that on the back end. Okay, only the Q&A is open.
Fair enough. We're going in blind.
We're going in blind. Looks like people are still filing in here a little bit. So I'm going to give it about 30 more seconds and then we'll get underway. All right, folks, thank you so much for joining us this evening at our AI Data Center Town Hall. Wonder what could possibly go wrong? Uh, Very excited tonight, but before we get underway, I want to be sure that as we're talking about this issue and learning about it together, that we recognize that we are gathered here across Alberta on treaties 6, 7, 8, and 4 territory. And we also want to recognize the Métis settlements across Alberta. And particularly as we think about the many First Nations and communities across the province who have been on these lands since time immemorial, that we think about the importance of treaty and respecting and honoring rights when it comes to water usage and big AI data centers. And so I want to particularly mention Sturgeon Creek Cree Nation, whose chief is going to be out in, I believe it's Montreal or Toronto, somewhere out east for a big AI data center conference to talk about the concerns that communities have, especially those that are going to be downstream from big AI data centers. So thinking particularly of Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation tonight, which is downstream from Smoky River. We are from Public Interest Alberta. Our mission is in our name. We're all about the public interest. And when we started thinking about AI data centers, we realized that we were behind the eight ball and behind the pack when it came to other places that were thinking about these things. And so that's why we're really happy to be joined by two special guests, Jenny Yeremiy from the Gravity Well from Calgary, as well as State Representative from Maine, Melanie Sachs, who has just passed an incredible bill in the State House calling for a moratorium on big AI data centers. And we're really happy to listen and learn from her as well. And so as you're thinking about this tonight, we encourage you to ask any questions you might have, and also mark in your calendars on June 4th, Kevin O'Leary's company, O'Leary Ventures, is hosting a town hall open house in person in Grand Prairie on June 4th. So that is your opportunity, if you're from the Peace region, to go ask tough questions and hopefully get some real answers about what they have planned for the region. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jenny Yeremiy, my friend, fellow organizer, co-conspirator, an amazing Albertan, and someone who has a ton of industry experience when it comes to energy. and also just a fantastic community organizer and a good new friend to Public Interest Alberta. Jenny, I'll leave it at that and pass it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Brad. It's a pleasure to work with you. I'm really enjoying all the work that Public Interest Alberta does, and really excited to be talking with an expert today. I have to say, I'm always hesitant to call myself an expert in these issues. I consider myself a generalist, and I think you'll understand why once I get through this presentation. Okay, if somebody can just let me know you can see where we're at, I'll make sure this is a slideshow first. Good to go. Okay, I'm going to assume I'm good to go.
Good to
Well,
go, Jenny.
okay, perfect. Welcome everyone to this webinar. So what could possibly go wrong? This is with respect to data centers like the Kevin O'Leary Wonder Valley near Grand Prairie, as Brad just mentioned. I'm Jenny. I'm your co-host with Brad for this webinar, and I'm super excited to hear from the state of Maine's House Representative Melanie Sachs. Before we let Representative Sachs enlighten us on how she's been fighting data centers in her state, I want to help you know what you can do locally with what you learned from Melanie today. So a bit about me and why I'm co-hosting. So I grew up in Castle Downs, Edmonton. I then moved to St. Albert when I was 9. I was a camp counselor. I played every school sport I could, was on student council and in musical theater. In elementary school, I was labeled distracting by teachers, and I couldn't ever argue that that wasn't true. It's just that I've always been very interested in what we are all doing rather than what I am meant to do. So from the age of 7, I knew I wanted to be a scientist, a chemist originally, but when I entered university, I stopped understanding chemistry. It was a completely different language to me, so I had to pivot, and I became a geophysicist instead. And I've been pivoting ever since. So the model I have for that in my mind is I am like a spider who builds the circles inwards rather than someone who takes one of those straight lines right to the center like another professional might do. So I bring a broad perspective to the work I do. I consider myself an oil and gas energy expert of all trades, if you will. So now put that energy in the oil and gas industry. So the first 12 years of my career, in this clockwise spiraling career, was focused on mapping, locating, and planning oil and gas drilling programs, or development, as it's called. And despite aiding the design, the direction, the size of drilling pipelines and facilities, it wasn't until I went to Blackshire that I started to look at environmental liabilities. And as my spouse said to me, who is also an environmental scientist, by the way, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Once you see environmental liabilities, you can't unsee them. So I tried to continue the responsible development narrative that holds very strong in this province from 2013 until 2020. Imaginea and Acaro were two very good examples of my learning liability and the rules that guide us through it. But then COVID happened. The federal government injected $1.7 billion into the industry to clean up and restore BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. And it was through an Indigenous reconciliation lens. I jumped at the opportunity to lead this when I was now at CNRL, and I poured all of that same energy into environmental restoration as I did in oil and gas development. In 2022, in June, I presented a credible plan to my peers, and the next day I was stripped of all of my work for it. So knowing that the issue was ultimately political, I then ran for the Alberta Party in 2023, and I now co-host the Gravity Well, as Brad mentioned, and I'm a full-time public activist. My goal is to share the efforts of the people who are doing the work to build solidarity, knowledge, organization, engagement, and accountability right here in Alberta. So what are some of the big lessons I took away, what I carry forward with me? So I had to leave the industry to act in the interest of the public good. So just to be clear, there was no space I could work there that was working towards public good. And what does public good look like to me? So it's embracing land stewardship laws and understanding that restorative justice is the way forward. Things like carbon capture and storage, net zero, hydrogen, pipelines, and now AI data centers are red herrings. They are not genuine solutions to where the catastrophes we're facing. The oil and gas industry, of which I was a part for 22 years, is actively misleading us. They're misleading governments, regulators, and stakeholders. That's you and me. The polluter pay principle and the rule of law are needed to need to be reinstated, to overcome the active misleading and redirect us. To me, this means water, not energy, and certainly not AI data centers need to be central in our decision making. So that is, water needs to be central, not energy. And the only way that's going to happen to move us in the right direction is through enough public disruption and redirection. That's your active participation. This photo, by the way, was taken in Provost, Alberta just last month with the Coalition for Responsibility, or CARE for short, of which both Brad and I are members. We're sharing information like this to build solidarity and action towards cleanup and restoration of oil and gas sites, for which Alberta has over 300,000, plus 100,000 hectares of oil sands mines as well. All of this amounts to over a $260 billion environmental liability, or an economic opportunity through the polluter pay principle. So I want to help you understand a little bit about what the misleading looks like, what's happening around data centers here in Alberta, and how, again, you can use what you learned today to fight with us. So first, there are unilateral decisions being made. So in December of 2024, the Alberta government announced a $100 billion investment into AI power in Alberta for the oil and gas industry. 70 billion of this money is dedicated to Kevin O'Leary's Wonder Valley project, of which Brad's been talking about. Who benefits from these data centers? First and foremost, the oil and gas companies, mostly foreign and mostly US. This is all meant to justify the continued extraction at an increased rate. And before I forget, I want to mention my sources at the bottom here. There are incredible people who are doing the real work of becoming experts for us, staying neutral and helping understand all the details that we need to fight. Jody McPherson, she has The Missive is hers. She also writes for the Energy Mix. And the Goose Media. I highly recommend you check out the Goose Media. They have videos which talk about, there's one dedicated to Kevin O'Leary's data centers. There's one dedicated to separatism. Really good information packed into a very enjoyable watch. So, and a lot of this information came from them. So the Trump regime, the US government, all of this data will be subject to the Cloud Act. So that means our data will be 100% accessible to Trump and the Epstein class, the people that are actively misleading us. This is an AI hyperscaler site. So it's only meant for companies like Google and Meta and Amazon. This is not valuable for democracy or for cooperation. It's funding greed and dominance and surveillance. So no benefits for society in this whatsoever, just private interests. And lastly, the funders, which I'm actually quite curious about considering the state of the Middle East right now, is it's expected to be foreign owned, either by Qatar or the UAE, and they've lost a lot of revenue since this illegal and unconstitutional war has been underway. Secondly, there's very little information or education happening, limited notice. On the waterfront, they very casually mention that there's 24 billion liters a year, which would go towards this. To put this in perspective, the oil and gas industry is consuming 310 billion a year. They try to talk about the irrigation district as a much bigger user of water. That's true, but the irrigation district is not something that we think is sustainable long-term. So really, they're pointing to something that is not sustainable anyway. But this is not small potatoes. That 24 billion, that's another 10% on top of what's happening today. And they're not mentioning the increased fracking and that water that would come from it. So this number, this 310 billion that was consumed in 2024, the last reporting year, that's grown since 260, the prior year. So every year they've been increasing water usage for these activities, these very poor quality resources that we're still trying to tap into. Important to mention that this site was once supposed to be a hydrogen plan. This was actually a part of the UCP platform, but it died off because the water usage made the projects impossible. So again, I think we're outside of the realm of what is possible. The area also declared agricultural disaster last year, and the Site C dam expansion has not been fully realized, meaning there is still some water volumes that are going to be attributed to that effort that is in competition with this and the farmers in the area, I should really add. The energy usage, so the information is being limited and staged. So they're in this diagram in the bottom, you can see they're phasing in the usage. But overall, it's looking like it would be 7 million homes. And they've even talked about having, 7 gigawatts, which is like adding 7 million homes to the province. But it can be as much as 12 gigawatts. So again, that's like adding 12 million homes of power usage for this. And we're a province of 5 million people. So this is more than doubling our population at a minimum. The environmental impacts have not been fully understood. It requires the Canadian government to break the clean energy regulation rules to help the country be in line with international law. We'd be breaking international carbon pricing, which we're seeing Carney allow at this late stage. And that the US and Alberta have been noted to understate their emissions as much as 7 times. So even with all of this in mind, all of these rules that were in place, we are also breaking them. This group that is misleading us in this effort is also understating the impacts of what they're doing. There's limited benefits, as you said, limited job creation. Worst of all, there's zero consultation happen. I just understand today that the Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation's water license appeal was denied by the Environmental Appeal Board. This is a highly orchestrated effort. It's happening at all levels of government, through the media and through our business sector, without voter consent. Again, none of us voted on Carney to relax our charter rights and freedoms. A healthy environment is a human right. Alternatives to oil and gas expansion are not being offered. So there are other ways, as I was mentioning, there's a restoration economy that is better suited for us to be investigating. The projects that are being dictated to us. So they're void of law. They're requiring that, again, not thinking about this industry that we should be exploiting, which is through the polluter pay legislation and holding up land stewardship laws. And lastly, projects are detached from reality. So as you've already heard me say about water, there's evidence in several areas of Texas right now that the oil and gas industry is and will drain these communities of their freshwater resources. So if this wasn't insane before February 28th, thinking about all this water usage and everything else, to me, this is downright criminal, because we are about to experience a 36% drop in GDP based on this illegal and unconstitutional war against Iran. We'll be seeing supply chain and food shortages as early as next month due to the more than 14 million barrels which have been deleted from the economic system. That's taken us back to 2011 production levels. So that's what's at stake, and why you are here to organize and learn how to stop this. So with all that, I'm going to let you know what we can do about it. So instead of having one way forward, one path forward that they are offering us, we need to build solidarity and allow for some plurality in our thinking. So appreciating that we have interdependencies, we have common concerns and common wishes. If we focus on those things, we can build a very strong coalition network together. We educate ourselves instead of limiting access and limiting participation. This way, we will, through radical transparency, we will be able to help educate our neighbors and come together in this fight together. Rather than orchestrating people, we will be organizing organically based on key values. So understanding that we want restorative justice, we want our rights and freedoms to be upheld. we'll be using publicly available education programs like Organizing for Power to help us understand how to organize and allow for some sovereignty within our organization. So instead of dictating, we will intake without judgment, and that is bringing in the willing and able who are ready to lead and organize locally. And if we do all this, then there is plenty of time for celebration and tons of fun to be had. We can engage, re-engage, and remain accountable and communicative with our community and feel good about doing it on repeat. So what you can do, so you can join us in this effort. You can join the Public Interest Alberta Democracy Task Force. In the next slide, I'll share Brad and I's emails. Reach out to one of us or both of us and let us know the following. Let us know what a democracy task force should look like in your opinion, how you see yourself participating, how you see us organizing and leading governments towards locally focused and restorative and caring economies built for the public good. Let us know what questions you have and how we can be sure to have fun while building this necessary disruption and redirection. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to hand it back over to Brad. Again, these are our emails. Reach out if you would like to join us in the Public Interest Task Force. And if you would like to bring forward any issues or any individuals for me to discuss on the gravity well, I'm all ears as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Very, very informative. Thank you so much. So for everybody who's still listening, and I see there's a bunch of you guys, please feel free to put in your questions in the Q&A section for asking Jenny any questions personally and during the Q&A session at the end. Now, it is going to be, we're going to be moving on to Representative Melanie Sachs. And before she begins, I just want to give a little shout out about the work that she's done. She's a licensed clinical social worker for over 25 years and is serving her third term in the Maine House, the province of Maine. She chairs the Energy, Utilities, and Technology Committee and previously chaired Appropriations and Financial Affairs, while also serving on the Tax Committee and the Maine Climate Council's Building, Infrastructure, and Housing Working Group. As first-generation college graduate, she holds a BA from Bates College and an MS from Case Western Reserve University, a data analytics certificate from UNH, and an energy policy planning designation from the University of Iowa. Wow, Melanie. She has led 2 nonprofits as executive director and served 6 years on the Freeport Town Council, including 2 terms as chair and 1 as vice chair. So, Melanie, I'm going to let you get started, and I'm going to pull up your slides as well.
Thank you so much. And I was so inspired, Jenny, by the work that you're doing and really appreciate that overview of sort of the perspective of the concerns that I think everybody has regarding data centers at the time. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here. I am from the state of Maine. Maine has a very close relationship with Canada, obviously where I am, especially your maritime provinces, of which I am delighted to visit often. And I'm very, very grateful to have this group highlight the fight, truly the fight that we are having here in Maine and trying to meet the moment, because this is a global conversation. I have had these conversations with folks in Germany, in Brussels, in London, and with several folks within the maritime provinces due to a proposed data center in Fredericton. So really grateful to be with you all. And this, I think, is a microcosm of some of the questions and concerns that we are all having at this inflection point about this very specific development opportunity. So thank you for having me here today. Next slide, please. So I am, as she has said, the House Chair of the Energy, Utilities, and Technology Committee. And I came to this work because our governor, Governor Janet Mills, issued an executive order forming an AI task force in December of 2024. And they came out with their recommendations in October of 2025. Now, within my work in the committee, we had been told data centers were not coming to Maine. Don't worry about it. They're not here yet. But yet, But yeah, there's always a yet, right? In this report, there were two pieces out of this AI task force that spoke directly to data centers. In the very first introductory section, it talked about Maine residents and their concerns about data centers, that their energy usage and their impact on the environment were top of mind for Mainers. That was the first thing they said about data centers in this report. And the second piece was that we really needed a playbook. This was later on in the report, kind of buried there. It said, by the way, we need a playbook here in Maine to talk about those very things, the environmental impacts, the energy usage, and the impact upon our grid, as well as on ratepayer impacts and utilities, and things like economic development siting. So to balance all of these things, Maine really needs a playbook. And that's why I called this presentation Meeting the Moment, because it felt like that expert panel, which were frankly mostly industry folks, as well as state agency folks from the Mills administration, they weren't saying maybe someday, they were saying we needed a playbook to talk about these very things that are on this slide, whether it be the wildlife, heat resources, water in particular, and energy in particular. So we really needed a playbook. So I went to the Department of Energy here in Maine and said, are you planning to do something? They said, no, not at the moment. So that's when I put in a bill. And that's the next slide. So I put in, after a lot of research about what was going on in the United States, but also internationally, what was the conversation around data centers? And frankly, there's a lot of work being done. In fact, one particular study talked about 300 pieces of legislation in the US alone in all of the 50 states around data centers. And some of it were promoting data centers, and others were trying to study data centers, and some were trying to curb data centers. And so looking at all of that, I decided the best way forward was the bill I put forward, which was an act to establish the Maine Data Center Coordination Council and place temporary limitations on certain data centers. So the next slide will tell you what that is. So the bill that I proposed did two things. I looked across the country and I saw that it felt very siloed in terms of how people were talking about data centers, either their regulatory body, their Public Utilities Commission, or maybe a legislative panel was looking at often just the environmental and sometimes ratepayer impact, but it was confined to those very specific entities looking at it. And so I decided that Maine, we're only a state of 1.4 million people. Yes, a lot of us know each other. In fact, the governor's mother was my English teacher. Like, that's how small Maine is. So I had decided that, Mainers get together and we really need to coordinate the response to data centers. If it's true that none are really going to be in Maine yet, then we really needed a coordinated response. So that's why the bill proposed establishing a 14-member council with representatives from these different agencies, because again, data centers, as Jenny so wonderfully pointed out, impact a lot of different things, right? The economic development, the energy, the natural resources, as well as our utilities and our grid stability. We're broken up into regional grid entities. So we're in the Northeast region for my grid. Texas has its own grid. There's the Mid-Coast grid, so Mid-Atlantic grid. So our grids are all bifurcated regionally as well. So all of those impacts really had to be brought together, along with municipal and tribal representation, labor, and outside environmental groups. That was the Coordination Council, to look at Maine's regulations and say, where do we need to improve? If data centers are coming to Maine, where do we need to improve? There were lots of ways that we could improve our system to meet the moment around data centers. So at the same time, the bill proposed a temporary limitation until November 1st of 2027, and that was very specific. The Coordination Council's report was going to be due February 1st, and with the Maine legislative calendar, Maine would start its next legislative session, next January, and it would take until November for some of those laws, if they're not emergency laws, to go into effect. It would also give some of these state agencies rulemaking authority to do their rulemaking and put regulations in place, again, before data centers. So we were at a little bit different, we thought, spoiler alert, we thought we were at a little different place of not really having any huge proposals ready to come into Maine so that we had time to do the work. But for me, both of those things felt necessary to do the collaboration council, but also to put the temporary limitation in place before these came forward. And it was only up to 20 megawatts. We know what utility scale solar looks like. We've done a lot of work of renewables here in Maine. So that's where the 20 megawatt limit came from. We know the impact of the grid of utility scale solar. So that's why we had 20 megawatts. Next slide, please. So the work of the bill, and I wanted to highlight this for all of you on the call today, is who were our coalitions that we were building. And frankly, I always thought that this was a nonpartisan issue. You can be very, very conservative and not support data centers, and you can be very progressive and the same. So folks on one side of the screen, you have the folks who are really concerned about ratepayer impact. Really, our electricity rates here in Maine are higher than across the country, tend to be a little bit higher. But also we've done a lot of work on renewables, and we have things like cool climate and a lot of land. So data centers, this would be very attractive to folks, to developers coming in, even though our rates are a little bit high. But as we know, as the research has shown, that can lead to almost a 300% increase in people's rates when these entities come in. And so that is a huge concern to some folks. So some folks came on board with the coalition simply because of ratepayer and grid impacts. For others, it's water, exactly what Jenny talked about. Maine's gone through periods of drought over the last few years. When you think of Maine, you think of natural resources. So environmental groups of all kinds came on board with the bill as coalition. There is a graphic there around AI. Some folks just have real concerns about AI and the impact on labor, on the impact on kids, on the impact on our future. And so they just really don't want any data center development to be part of the culture of Maine. So they came to the coalition. And then just regular Mainers just saying, you know what, I don't have enough information, and we really think a pause is a good idea so that we can talk about this. So that was the coalition that I built around the bill. I would say those that were opposing the bill are on the other side, with the Maine State Chamber of Commerce, even though local chambers of commerce were sometimes on board with my bill, the state of Maine Chamber of Commerce, and really represented some of the business industry, who's saying any industry is great. Come on in. We need the tax base. We need it now. We need to get on the cutting edge. There's an urgency to this, and we're going to lose even with an 18-month pause. I will also say there was one major labor union. Some labor unions sort of sat on the sidelines, but when I've talked to folks in New Mexico, for example, they're saying that their labor union is very much on board because of the temporary jobs that are going to be created with data centers. And I wanted to put in the University of Maine. They came in at the very end after the bill had even passed the chambers and come in and said, please, and urged the governor to veto the bill, which was really unfortunate because they hadn't been involved at all. I put them on there because, again, my colleagues in New Mexico that I just had a Zoom with said that their major university is also on board with data centers. So I really want to encourage folks to be engaging with their local universities to see if they can be a partner with you around data centers, because it was an unexpected last minute piece here in Maine, and it is certainly becoming prominent in other places in the US. So I really wanted to just highlight that as a coalition, perhaps potential partner, but also potential opposer of any legislation. So that was the coalition we built. So I will say, yep, thanks, she's a go right ahead. So I will say that this bill, LD 307, passed and final enactment both in the House and in the Senate with bipartisan support. Like I said, I had some incredibly conservative folks. I'm a Democrat. I tend to be a very pragmatic progressive, fairly progressive on many issues. And this just felt like a very thoughtful bill to meet the moment to talk about data centers here in Maine. And so we were very proud that we had built a bipartisan coalition and sent it to the governor's desk. But then, dun, 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 it was vetoed. So one person, Governor Mills, decided to veto the bill that I have said continuously would have given protections for 1.4 million Mainers. And there was one reason. In her veto message, she said, you remember those two parts of the bill, she said she liked the Data Center Council, and she liked a pause on she said large scale data centers. She agreed with both parts of the bill. So why did she veto the bill? And that is the next slide. She vetoed the bill because of one town of just over 4,000 people in Jay. I live in Freeport now. I represent Freeport. Freeport's a town of about almost 10,000 folks here in Freeport, maybe 9,200 at this point. Jay is a community of 4,000. Maine had many industrial mills that are no longer productive. They were former paper mills, of which Jay was one of them. My dad used to work in the Jay paper mill. I know exactly what it is and what it means. I've been to this mill site. I know what it means to the community of Jay when the mill no longer worked and produced paper. The economic impact to that community was quite large. And this has happened throughout Maine. We have mill sites all throughout Maine that were, again, a beautifully forested state that really relied on its paper and pulp and wood products industry, and still does to many extent. So there's this one site in Jay. Again, Jay, it's about 4,000 people. And the governor had stated that she really, when I put in the bill, again, we have been told there were no data center projects here in Maine, but lo and behold, they started coming out of the woodwork. Exactly what Jenny said, of these had been in secret, been put forward as projects for certain folks to know, but the communities knew nothing about them. There was one in particular in southern Maine called in Sanford, Maine, that apparently has been in production for quite a while and just surfaced because of the bill. And the fact that they were surfaced because of the bill is so disappointing, right? You want to have these community conversations because the people of Jay may have been perfectly fine, but what they didn't know was that this developer had a ribbon cutting with the governor, and I didn't know this until the bill came about, had a ribbon cutting with the governor back in 24. Actually, it was also in 24. They had a ribbon cutting. Board manufacturer was coming to Jay. Isn't that wonderful? But by April of 2025, the Trump tariffs had made that project impossible because they were supposed to get the parts from Germany and from China. And so it was no longer economically viable, as well as the markets for those compressed boards were no longer going to be viable. But instead of telling the community of Jay, he had pivoted to a data center. He kept that secret. It pivoted not long after this all came out, when the bill came out. And they didn't know about this until my bill, when all of a sudden he was forced into transparency because of my bill. And he has said, well, it's going to bring 100, he's been shifting anywhere from 100 to 125 to 150 jobs to the Jay project now, the data center project. And that was the reason that the governor vetoed the bill, was because of that project in Jay with this developer who was making promises around jobs and around tax base, and saying he didn't want any tax incentives and that this was good for Jay. And we actually put forward an amendment to the bill saying, hey, can we carve out industrial sites such as Jay? And that was defeated 115 to 29. So even the exception she asked for did not pass in the House, and it wasn't even offered in the Senate. And she vetoed the bill anyway. Am I a little bitter? Still just a wee bit, and it's been a few months. I'm still working on that. So, and what makes it even worse is there an article just came out from the publication called The Verge, a national organization. And Tony, the developer, said, oh, by the way, those job numbers I got, well, I had gotten those from the data center developer, but I'm not a data center guy. So the reason that she vetoed the bill was the jobs that were based on promises for an agency that's not even there yet. He's going to be contracting with Sentinel Data Center. And just as Jenny said, we have no idea of the specs of what co-located data center is going to be at this particular site. And so any claims of water or usage or emissions or anything like that are not credible, because we don't actually know the tenant that's going in here. So it was vetoed based on very, very, very sketchy information, in my estimation. And I've been trying to make that known since. So that was incredibly, incredibly unfortunate. Next slide. So when the Maine House failed to override that veto, we just didn't have the numbers to do it for 2/3 of the present House members that day, which I didn't expect we would. That same day, the governor issued her executive order to create her own council because she'd said it was a great idea. But at the same time, she added a rep from the University of Maine who had urged the veto. So they earned themselves a seat on the council, but then 2 private sector entities. So added 2 more seats from the industry. So now she's got her, all of her agency folks. She has an environmental group that is only doing clean energy, who the representative of who filled that slot says he knows nothing about the environmental impacts. And then we've got industry on there. So not holding my breath. She also had directed our Public Utilities Commission to identify and implement strategies as soon as they could around ratepayers. But again, it's got no force of law, and they will have to do rulemaking. All of this will be going on as projects are now allowed to move forward in Maine, unchecked, just proliferate here in Maine without the protections that we tried to put in place, which is unfortunate. Next slide, please. So what's happening is on my speech that I said in veto day, I said to communities, unfortunately, we are not providing you with the statewide framework that you need for a statewide problem, because these data centers, when they come in, again, they're a very specific kind of development. They are not going to just impact the location that they are sited, that their impacts of light, water, heat, emissions, all of those emissions, greenhouse emissions, all of those things, impact on the grid and electricity use are going to go far beyond their locality. So the best you can do is talk to your surrounding neighbors as well and put your own moratorium that is legal under the law, can only go for 6 months according to state law. Hopefully we can get it renewed. But communities are starting to do so. They are starting to put, which is what we thought would happen. It's happening in other states like Michigan. 19 little communities have started. Maine has about 475 tiny communities, and we will see how many of them will put in their moratorium until the next legislative session, which is in January. And the first advisory council meeting for Governor Mills's council is slated for June 3rd, and they are open and accessible by Zoom to people. So that is Maine's story, and I want to thank you so much. And of course, any questions that folks may have, I'm here for as well. Thank you for your time this morning, this evening. I almost said this afternoon, this evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Melanie. It's really great to have your perspectives here with what we're facing here in Alberta, because for Albertans, we're facing a lot of different problems when it comes to US interventions, but when it comes to our friends like in Maine, who are also experiencing the same thing and even have gone through the same thing so far, it's nice to learn from these experiences and see what we can do in our own lands, being on other people's lands to begin with. So I want to open up with the Q&A, and I know Jenny's been going on answering questions that people are directly asking her, so that's amazing. A lot of these questions are somewhat related to Melanie yourself and what the work that you've done in Maine in general, and some of these are collaborative answers. So I'll pinpoint which ones are which. First things first, we have some youth in the audience as well, and as we've seen with youth in Alberta these days, that they have just been on and on the Gong Show, on the grounds, organizing, promoting, advocating as much as they can. So a youth is asking, what is the first thing we should be learning to stop this, to stop the data center power plants that are being manufactured? Because it's a lot of things that are being connected and more people need to start thinking about this. So what advice can you give to some of the youth that can start advocating with the connections that they have? Jenny, I'll start with you first.
I think educating locally. So looking up where are the sites happening, who are the local people that have a say. I didn't touch on in my summary that the way the Alberta government works, they narrow the scope of who can actually complain against any of these projects. So You have to live very close to these projects to be able to claim that it negatively impacts you. I encourage people to go to the Olds Transparency Project on Facebook. There is an incredible group of people, just like Representative Melanie described, of all different backgrounds. We're talking people that are looking to independence versus people that are concerned about ecological health, working together in collaboration to push back against this. So it's coming down to very specific things. They've been holding open houses, they've been educating each other, they've been looking at the specific details of the project, and they've been holding their representatives to account. Personally, I'm aiming to attend any hearings that they have where people can help support them, to be there in number, to be there in voice. I have personally spoken at councils before, like regional councils, against or bringing up the concerns of water and helping the members understand the concerns they have. So I would just say supporting them, being ready to speak, come with information that you learn. Like I said, go to the Goose Media. That was one of the questions I was asked again. Learn about it there. Follow Jody McPherson on Substack. The Missive is her stuff. It's literally just looking to the information, how, Googling where are the data centers currently happening and how can we, and then just looking to the community members that are standing this up and trying to be in solidarity with them. That's my best advice. I'm sure Melanie has some other great ideas.
Well, it's actually, thank you, Jenny. It's actually quite similar. We actually had several youth groups who were contacting their legislators that were urging them to either override the veto or support the legislation, letting their voices be known. I will say in one state, when city councilors approved it, in Missouri, I believe it was, they had a recall and they voted out those city councilors within a week. And which is incredible, and youth were involved in that. So paying it for us at the moment, this has shifted to a local fight, and so it will be local youth groups are getting involved with these local temporary limitations or moratoriums or bans right now, to say we don't want them right now until we can have some sort of framework and accountability in place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Question for you, Melanie. Now we know that between US and Canada, the regulatory policies that come within each state and province, they're very different. And when we're comparing USA and Canada, we're talking about regulatory procedures that probably don't even exist in Canada. So I wanted to ask you, what part of Maine's approach do you think would be transferable to see in Alberta? And Jenny, if you could please add on to that as well, what you think Alberta can use from Maine when it comes to these grids and climate policies and land use contexts.
Right. I was actually appalled to hear that this proposed project for the latest one that you're talking about was exempted from environmental review. I mean, that's the reason we have environmental review, right? And these should not be exempted from that. And so my approach had been for Maine's regulation, having this collaborative council to talk about what it is that we needed to do to add to our environmental permitting, for example, that we need a cost causer for impact on the grid. So if you are causing the grid resilience to not be to be impacted by your facility, that your facility must pay that. We have very, very aggressive climate goals here in Maine around emissions, around carbon neutrality. And my council, and I believe the governors as well, said that whatever work needs to be within the context of that. And I think those hold true for whatever locality. I was just talking with somebody in Brussels who was talking about the fact that they're trying to get EU regulations around this, and doing that is very difficult because obviously there are different nation states have very, very different goals and outcomes and climate goals, etc. So I think really adhering to what you have worked so hard on here in Alberta to put those protections in place and saying, let's hold each other accountable. One of the things that I really hope come out of our commission, for example, would be, because this is what's happening in a few other states here in the US, is they are required on pick your schedule. Is it monthly? Is it annually? Is it quarterly? For the emissions, for the energy usage, for light, heat, noise, water usage, so that we can continue to track it. So that if you said, this is what we are going to do, then let's prove it. And so whatever that framework is, fine, trust, but verify, verify, verify. I'm not even super trusting at this point for exactly the reasons that Jenny said. So I think those lessons of community conversation on outcome-based measurement, of holding their feet to the fire of promises, and getting that in writing, whether it's community benefit agreements or something else, I think all of that is applicable to whatever region you are in. Jenny, I think you probably have some other thoughts about that.
No, that was fabulous. I totally agree in terms of the outcome-based view of things. I think understanding limitations, some of the conversations I've seen in the Olds group, because these are oil field workers. We're in a part of the world that understands this work. The supply chain to actually even have these gas turbines to use these sites is years out. So even if we can't look at an environmental regulation to stop this, I think there's a lot of ways that we can poke holes in these projects, looking at the work that you've done in Maine and other jurisdictions, as you mentioned, that have been successful in stopping these projects. How did they do it? I've seen much success come from a lot of people flooding local town councils. It's very hard to ignore your neighbor. And that's the benefit of this being a localized issue at the end of the day, is that they're forcing us to speak to our neighbors and support people in communities that we wouldn't otherwise be engaged with, but to support them in this effort to push back. Yeah, I think just being very logical. I want to go through Melanie's presentation and just be sure that we are following all of those same check marks, making sure that we're looking to all the same angles that you have, to make sure that we follow suit where you've had success and adapt where you've had setbacks.
A few more questions here. Someone is wondering, when it comes to the mentioned coalitions, we've seen time and time again, there are some levels of government that might overlook certain bills, certain motions, certain aspects to policy when it comes to performing such manufactured data centers. For example, in Minnesota, when there's a town in Minnesota that had voted on an entire town council that voted for a data center. So Melanie and Jenny as well, when it comes to our own government in Alberta and some neglect from our own ministers, like Nate Glubish, for example, how does this impact the game plan going forward when it comes to organizing and advocating for proper policies and regulations when it comes to, and awareness when it comes to such data center plants?
Yeah, I'm just want to highlight how disappointed I am in Nate Glubish's efforts to pretend that these are all legitimate projects. In fact, I think he's using AI to help write his his arguments. And being the artificial intelligence or the technology minister, it's, I think, despicable to be misleading our community in that way. I think it's holding his feet to the fire, as Melanie said, making sure that we are countering the things that he's saying, being prepared for these fights to continue and be ready to push back with information and keep holding them responsible for the direction that they're taking us. I think we are facing, I saw a name of somebody I know quite well here, James, in the chat. We have a very intelligent person in the province. He co-authored a report of its global bankruptcy, that we've entered global bankruptcy. It was released in January. We have very serious issues of water shortages coming. I am speaking to, as I showed with the Care Coalition, landowners that are seeing wells, water wells going in all around them, companies that are looking to drain the size of Sylvan Lake in their own efforts in order to frack for the wells that would provide the power to these things. There are so many ways that this cannot move forward in like a physical limitation way that I think we just have to keep staying the course and keep pushing back and keep showing where the holes are, the gaps are in their thinking. And we will be able to stall and delay until we can hopefully start moving in the right direction.
And I would say don't count anybody out. I mean, farmers here in Maine tend to be pretty conservative, but just as Jenny was saying, the impact on the land, both from the heat and the water resources that are going to come from these things, the amount of electricity that it's going to be costing them, the cost of that electricity on their household budgets, on their agriculture budgets is enormous if this is not done thoughtfully and well. So I didn't count anybody out when I was talking to folks about this bill. And I think that's our way forward and holding us accountable. I said it on the floor, vote us out. This is becoming a litmus test in my gubernatorial race. So Governor Mills is no longer, she suspended her Senate campaign. I'm not saying it's because of this bill, but let me tell you, there's a lot of people who were not going to vote for her because of this veto. It is becoming a litmus test. I call it an inflection point. It is becoming a litmus test in our next wave of elections, and it should be. I can say that because I'm not running again, people say, but no, I would have said that no matter what. I don't happen to be rerunning for reelection, but this was echoed on the floor. We had another bill that talked about two very big state incentive programs for businesses that whose foundation is creating jobs. And so there was a bill put in saying data centers should not have access to these two state financial incentive programs. And that passed mostly on Democratic hands. But I think people should make that an issue. This person voted for tax breaks for data centers that don't create jobs. And we know that from the research. I may be a social worker, but I'm also outcome-based analytics. And those two things can be true, I'm telling you now. But also that we need to ask very tough questions of those within power to make those decisions, whether, for me, it's local town councils, county commissioners, all the way up to our federal officers, both state and local officers in both chambers of the House and Senate, and as well as gubernatorial. And more people, the best thing about this bill was it started the conversation here in Maine. And so that was not a question people were asking gubernatorial candidates before I came, and now they are. And that's a good thing. That's a very good thing.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Yeah. I have two last questions, one being a water question. So Jenny, please let me know if you can answer this. This is actually from a more local question, but the interim water license for the initial 6 million cubic meter was approved, but the project still needs approval for phase 2 and 3 approval for the 24 million cubic meters. Normally, that would require Indigenous consultation, but could this government bypass that again? As well, there be an option of pushing the feds to get involved for impact assessment outside of other legal challenges.
Yes, especially the latter about getting federal involvement in this. One thing I've been learning by engaging with Indigenous advocates and elders is we've downloaded resource development onto the provinces, which undermines the treaties. The treaties are with the province or with the state, with the country, or with quite frankly the Queen or the King now, I should say. So the treaties are a federal jurisdiction. And so every time that we make decisions on a provincial level with resource development, we are always in violation of the treaties if we do not do that consultation. So yes, ultimately, this is all a federal jurisdiction issue. The other thing I want to say, and again, I want to encourage people to check out the Goose Media. I'm going to say it again because they have one on separatism. And I want to talk a little bit about how separatism comes into this, in my view now. If we're only thinking of the province of Alberta and these made up lines which make our province, we are not thinking about the impacts of water beyond those borders. Water doesn't see lines, it follows boundaries, physical boundaries. And so we have a responsibility as Albertans to pass a certain amount of water onto Saskatchewan and onto Manitoba before it meets the Hudson's Bay. So that is federal jurisdiction. And to me, that's one of the main reasons why I think independence is even something we're talking about, because it's not really allowing us to think about our responsibilities at that level, at that really important level of ecological boundaries. So yes, 100%, this needs to be fought locally, this needs to be fought at a provincial level, and this needs to be fought federally. But especially we need to get the federal government to intervene here. And we need to show that our rights have been infringed by our provincial government in many ways. And the federal government needs to understand that they should be intervening from that perspective. So yeah, I think that covers what I want to say.
Yeah. And lastly, this comes on to land rights. So we actually have a person in our viewers who is actually from the community of the Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation. And they are wondering with, it's actually quite upsetting, but they're wondering how their community members what can they do to help, quote unquote, pause this project for now. Not having positions of power, but they need to realize that power comes in numbers. So they're wondering how the Wonder Valley project, which will impact their own traditional lands and trap lines, can be, protected.
Drawing on the fight with the coal mines in southern Alberta, it's my understanding that Section 35 of the charter is being violated for First Nations. So again, this is a federal fight that would need to be brought into play. There is an effort down south right now to appeal the water license for the coal mine down there. Maybe I'm not saying that well, but there is an appeal being put forward by First Nations, the Piikani Nation at this moment. I think it would be really helpful to look to that appeal and understand how to apply it in the same area. And again, I would just, in terms of grassroots efforts, look to building something on social media, like what Olds has done, just to help people understand how to support you, where to find you, to see what you're saying, how to support what you're saying, how to show up when you need people in a hearing, how to connect you with other locals that are non-Indigenous, that want to be in solidarity with you. I'm sure there are hundreds of people that are interested in doing that. So I think it's just using all the tools that we have in terms of finding people, lots of people. I'm really glad to hear from Melanie the same thing, that this is a unifying issue. There are very few people who are pro AI data center, pro surveillance, pro big business, foreign intervention, pro water draining, etc. This is a massive opportunity for us to set aside any differences we have and come together in a very vital fight.
Melanie, did you have any thing to add on when it comes to land rights and the consultations that you faced with in your area?
Well, I just want to say that it was really important to me that we had tribal representation. We have several tribes here in Maine. They're often overlooked, and they're actually, again, one of the projects that came out of the woodwork, or so to speak, was there is a permit with our federal regulatory that is not required to come here in Maine, to our Public Utilities Commission for an underwater data center in the Quoddy Bay, which is part of the Passamaquoddy and Penobscot land rights there. And their application, I would say, emphasized collaboration with the tribes that was non-existent. And so when Jenny did a really good job about talking about the overpromises and frankly lies from some developers, I think that it's really, really important to say, okay, this is what you're saying, kind of like I did with Jay. This is what you're saying, but let's look at the scaffolding. And often it's a house of cards. So I think for us, for many within my in my region, as well as within the legislature, the tribal fight for sovereignty is a conversation that's happening here in Maine. And until that happens, we still need to make sure we are having close collaborative conversations and that our tribal representation is there at the table on the council along with municipal representation, because both things are equally important.
Definitely.
I just want to correct one thing I said. It's a judicial review that's been filed in Southern Alberta. So I would just encourage them to look to the Piikani Nation for the specifics of that. Thank you.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much, both Jenny and Melanie, for joining us tonight. I know, Melanie, it's pretty late for you down there in Maine, so I want to wrap this up as soon as possible. But I want to thank everyone who attended tonight and everyone who's given all the input on these questions. A lot of them were saying how much great work that you both are doing in your own respective areas and how much work still needs to be done. But they're all very impressed with all the work that has been done, both by Melanie yourself and Jenny yourself as well, continuing in Alberta. For those who are watching, this recording is going to go live onto our YouTube channels in a few days or tomorrow latest. Other than that, Brad is unfortunately cannot be here. He's driving back from Lethbridge, where we just did another presentation. So keep on look on our social medias, and we'll be posting more about what we're going to plan on doing next with AI data centers and what more information we can put out there as well for resources. But once again, thank you so much, Melanie and Jenny, for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be here. Truly, thank you.
Lovely to meet you, Melanie. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Yeah, everyone here too. Thanks for the great questions too.
All right. Have a great night, everybody.